So we really appreciate you all for you being here. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jenny Aperti. I'm the director of the Texas Mexico Center. Welcome. It is delightful to have you here for a very important topic, we believe, and it's so important that today we have the pleasure of doing this in collaboration with the Baker Institute from Rice University. This is so crucial that we join forces to bring you this program today. And we are gonna have some amazing voices that you'll get to hear from. So I will not take a lot of time. Just a quick announcement before we begin the program. Today's Q&A, for Q&A today, if you're interested, please form a line behind the microphones so that we can get the Q&A going at the time of Q&A. So today we have three fantastic speakers. I am going to start by introducing you to Ivan Rodriguez, research scholar at the Center for U.S. Mexico of the Baker Institute at Rice University. Welcome, Ivan. Also joining us is Madeline Sabotny, who is a professor of economics at University of North Florida, but of course, we are so happy and delighted to say she is a research fellow of the Texas Mexico Center. Thank you so much for joining us. And the person who helped us make today possible, great friend of the center, and who is going to get our program started today. He is you have the full title in the program, I don't want to butcher it, so, but very importantly, he's the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico Center of the Baker Institute at Rice University, Tony Payan. Thank you so much.
Let me give you the, well, first of all, thank you, Jennifer, for the invitation to be here at SMU. It brings good memories because I went to school in Dallas as an undergraduate and master's, University of Dallas on the other side of town in Irving. So I spent some time in this city when I was late teen, early 20s, and I really, really enjoyed it. So it's always nice to come back to Dallas, even though it's a very different Dallas than it was Las Colinas in that area when I was an undergraduate back in 89 to 92. So it's been a while. As Jennifer said, I'm the director of the U.S. Mexico Center, and we look at very many different issues between the U.S. and Mexico, and one of them is immigration, labor markets, and labor integration. To be sure, I think there's always been an integration of labor markets between the U.S. and Mexico. Those of us who enjoy history can go back a very long time and know that the Mexican population has always been in the southwest part of the United States and in Texas. And they've always come and gone, and they've always worked and gone home. And there's always been this migration back to the 1800s. It sped up during the Mexican Revolution 110 years ago, when Mexico was in turmoil, and lots of folks from Mexico, including many members of my family, moved from Mexico to the United States. Now spread through Indiana and Virginia and Colorado and Texas and Oklahoma and many places. And then the Bracero program between 1942 and 1964, when 5 million people from Mexico participated in U.S. Labor markets, particularly agriculture, but many other different services, industries, and things like that. And then when the Bracero program ended in 64, Mexicans continued to come through the 80s, when President Ronald Reagan granted an amnesty program, 1986, and naturalized almost 3 million people, of whom the majority were Mexican citizens. And that was supposed to stop it, but it didn't. The population, in fact, we enforced immigration so hard and relatively successfully that people didn't really want to come, work, and go home. Instead, they came, worked, and stayed. So the undocumented population went further up to 12 million, which was, I think, 3 million at that time. So over time, we've seen that people come and they work. And I can tell you that there's a number of visas that Mexican citizens make use of, and they work in the United States. There's the H-2A and the H-2B. Those are agricultural visas, 300,000 of them this year, last year alone. Lots of them really working in farms and various places in the United States. And then you get a lot of other workers in construction with those kinds of visas. And then half of the undocumented population, 5.7 million Mexican citizens, of course, working in the labor markets in the United States, whether it's construction, food processing, agriculture, hospitality, services, landscaping, and on and on. The one thing that we have to understand is that the United States is really an incredible economy, and it's been. Sure, we go through tough times sometimes, but at the end of the day, this is a very dynamic economy that needs workers and hands and people to come in and participate in the labor markets. But the visa system that we have today is not up to date. We don't have the right visa paths. We don't have the right way for people to come into the United States and work, apply for citizenship and stay, or go home. The visas that we have today, and there's all kinds of them, B and E and EV and L and M and O and H and subcategories, and there's all kinds of visas. They're very difficult to get. There's no line for people to stay. You have to have a real reason, either family reunification, or you have to have somebody to sponsor you that has the ability to petition for you. Or you have to have an employer who's willing to get you an H-1B, which is a high-skilled visa, and then transfer from there to a green card and then to citizenship. They're very, very hard to get. And yet the US continues to need this enormous supply of labor. There's another factor that we have to be aware of, and that's the demographic shifts in the United States. We're graying. We're all getting older. We're retiring as fast as we can, and we're not having children. People are not marrying. 51% of households in the United States today are single folks living alone. For the first time in the history of the United States, single households are a greater number than couples living together. This is really dramatic, and that is going to affect the labor market. And then one more thing, so that you realize, because Congress has not been able to get an agreement to open new visa paths or flexibilize visa paths for workers to come to the United States, integrate themselves into the labor market and society, or come in as guest workers and go. Because those visas, even for guest workers like the H-2A and H-2B, are very difficult. Employers don't want them because they're very difficult to get. It takes a long time. You have to justify it, to go through the entire process. It's really, really difficult. So what we have now is essentially a market that has anywhere, depending on who what source you consult, but you have anywhere between 4 and 11 million vacancies in the country, unfilled jobs, and we can't find the workers. So we're approaching a very dramatic stage. I don't see the possibility of Congress acting anytime soon, certainly not in 2024. We've been there before in 2013 and 2007, and Congress doesn't seem to be able to do it. But we do have an undocumented population that is working. 7.8 million of the 10.7 million are actually working in U.S. industries. Some of them are in the informal economy. You can find them at the lots of Home Depot stores and things like that. But we're also distorting our own labor market. And I'll give you one instance before I ask my colleagues to take the microphone. One of the things that we did is have a workshop with a lot of the folks from the construction industry in Houston. And we quickly realized that many of them, construction industry companies, cannot hire these undocumented workers that they rely on. Because then they can get penalized and it's very costly. They could get fined $10,000 per employee or, be sanctioned otherwise. And so they don't hire them. But they need the workers. And so what's happening now is you have these labor brokers that are emerging between the industry and the workers. And so if I am a labor broker, what I do is I have 200, 300, 150 undocumented workers, and then I go to Stan Marek Construction, who's a friend of mine, who's a big construction company in Houston, and I say, Stan, how many workers do you need? He said, well, I gotta deliver this shopping center. I need 150, 200 for 3 months. And then I write a contract, $30 an hour, times 150 workers, times 2 months, whatever it is, so many millions of dollars. I will get you the workers there, they'll be on site, and then you give me the millions of dollars, and then I pay them in cash, and then I say, well, they're not my employees either. They are independent contractors, individual independent contractors, and they're responsible for their own I-9s. And so, and then I say, well, I'm gonna get $20 million for this project. I deliver the workers, they do the job, and then I pay them in cash, maybe $10, $12 an hour, and I pocket the rest from 30. And so the thing is, these workers are working, they're not paying taxes, they're showing up in the work sites without insurance, they get sick or they get into an accident, and then they end up in the emergency room, and then they have to, we have to pay it because it's indigent care. They got no insurance. And we end up paying for that. And they're not paying taxes, and the labor broker is saying, I'm not responsible for their taxes. They have to file with the IRS, get their own ITIN number and file their own taxes. If they don't, it's their business. So this is it. And the government is not getting its taxes. And then sometimes employers like Stan have to rework the site because they're not trained workers. They don't know what they're doing. So they show up at the work site, and then there's defects and problems with the project. And then the project owner comes back and says, I just inspected the place. There's a lot of errors and mistakes. You have to correct them on your dime. This is a distortion in our markets, and it's millions and millions of workers that are doing this. So by not acting in legislating visa paths to get the appropriate number of workers into the United States in various ways, we are ourselves cheating ourselves of good workers, accountable workers. We're having to pay for their care when they get into an accident, and the government is being cheated out of its taxes. And when the labor broker gets in trouble, it disappears. The company vanishes. Nobody knows who the labor broker was, because it could be a little office hidden somewhere, and then you go there to find the labor broker and it's not there. There's all kinds of distortions in the labor market. I think that Congress needs to legislate. I'm not appealing to humanitarian concerns. Those are very hard to sell in the United States today. All the migrants coming from the border, that's another talk. I'm appealing to our self-interest. We need the workers, and we need Congress to act to get the workers into our economy, or we're going to be slipping further and further behind. To be competitive as a region, as a North American region, we need to legislate to integrate our labor markets in a legal and orderly way. And so that's my introduction to you, just to give you one instance of what is happening to us. And now let me pass the microphone on to our first presenter. Is that you, Ivan? Yes. Ivan will do a presentation, and then Madeline, and afterwards I'll take some Q&A from you guys, and we'll have a good conversation. So get your question ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer, for the invitation about the coordination with Tony and thank you, Madeline. I'm really happy for being with Madeline. I have read a lot of papers from Pia and Madeline over the years about immigration, so it's really a pleasure to meet you in person. And well, Tony has pointed out the problem of immigration. So today I only want to let you know about the importance of immigrants for the U.S. and two issues. One is that the importance of them for the U.S. labor market, and the second is that we need those workers in the U.S. labor market. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk about first labor shortages. So to know that we need workers and we cannot find those workers here in the U.S. So the second is about the importance of immigrants for the U.S. economy. And the third point is how to alleviate this problem. At the center, Tony and I wrote a paper about how to help the U.S. economy to get workers. And one is to try to get, well, there's one visa, the TN visa. I'm going to talk briefly about that. So with that visa, we can bring some more workers, to the U.S. So factors contributing to the U.S. labor shortages, Tony mentioned two. The main causes are, of course, the aging of the workforce. We don't have enough young workers to substitute those that are retired. The second is the fall in the national fertility rate. Right now, we have seen this problem, but in the future, of course, we are not going to have enough young workers to substitute the people that are leaving the labor market. And two more are given by the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. One was a lot of people decided to retire early because of the closure of the economy. They decided not to return. And another reason was because that they were out of the market and they received benefits from the government, unemployment benefit. They decided to wait to get a better job with better working conditions. And of course, one that is very important is the fall that we have in the immigration. So to have an idea about the problem of labor shortages, we can see here the civilian labor force participation rate. This rate measures basically the number of people that are working or looking for a job related to for the whole population that should be working. So if you want the stock of workers that the U.S. has, as you can see, since 2009, this rate has decreased. So we have a lot of problems because we don't have enough workers. To see this with numbers, comparing February 2020, I mean before the pandemic, and February 2024, we have around 2.4 million missing workers. So that's a huge amount of workers that we don't have. So, and what are the causes of what can cause this? Well, of course, pressures on wages, because firms now have to compete to retain a worker or give more, a higher wage in order to attract workers from other firms. So that can cause inflation. And another problem is that a lot of firms are not producing at full capacity. So because they don't have enough workers. So all of these are affecting the U.S. economy negatively. We are not producing at full capacity. We need workers and these firms cannot find them. Another way to see these shortages, we have here job openings. And number of unemployed workers, as you can see, we have a gap. Since 2018, we have more job openings than unemployed workers. There's a gap, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic. This was the opposite, but after the recovery of the pandemic, we have more job openings than the number of unemployed workers. Tony mentioned that. So we have, for example, even if all workers, unemployed workers decided to work, we still have a gap. We don't have enough workers to fill all the jobs unfilled. So in 2022, the average number of jobs left unfilled, the number was around 5.2 million jobs. Last year, the number was around 3.2 million jobs left unfilled. If you want, in other words, for every unemployed worker, last year, there were 1.5 job openings. So it's a lot of, this is, a huge problem that we have. I'm talking about immigration. Here you have the net international migration to the US. So you can see that since 2016, this number that is measures the difference between immigrants and emigrants, you can see that immigration decreased since 2016 to before the pandemic. So this has, of course, affected the US labor market. And still we are behind the trend that we used to have before the pandemic. So now I can say, I think that we can understand that we have a problem, we have a labor shortage in the US. And the second thing that I want to point out is the importance of immigrants to the US, and that they are coming here to work. Here are the rate that I said before, the civilian labor force participation rate. You can see that that rate for immigrants is higher than the rate for native-born workers. So that means that these people are coming here to work, or they are looking for a job. So, and at the end, this complementary between immigrants and native-born workers could provide more economic growth to the US. I'm going to provide some examples of the importance of immigrants in the US economy. The first paper was written by Pia, that is also a fellow of the SMU, and she pointed out in that paper that around more than one half workforce growth in the past 2 decades was attributed to immigrants. So it's a huge amount. And the second paper is from George Borjas. He estimated that around 11% of the US GDP was contributed by immigrants. So if we use that number, we can say that immigrants added up to $3 trillion to the US economy in 2023. Of course, it's more because we know that there are second generation workers and third generation workers. And the third paper is one that we wrote at the center to try to know the economic impact of the problem of the COVID-19 pandemic at the closure, because you remember that because of the closure, immigrants couldn't come to the US. So, and using a number that Giovanni Perry estimated that around 2 million fewer immigrants came to the US in 2020 and 2021, we estimated that this economic impact for the US was around 1.1% of the US GDP per year. So it's a huge amount. So you can have, there are other papers, there are many papers that talk about the importance of immigrants. Again, immigrants are also in key sectors of the US economy, but also they are key drivers, not only of the US economy. In the case of Mexicans, they also are a key driver for Mexico with remittances. So these workers are not only supporting this economy, but also others' economy like Mexico. And the participation of the immigrants in the US labor force is around 18.6% in 2023. And in this graph, you can see that it has increased from 15% to 18%. So it has increased in recent years, But the most important part is that these people are, again, in key sectors of the economy. And I'm going to provide, well, Tony provided very good examples of the participation of these immigrants in key sectors. But here you can see that, for example, for farming, fishing, and forestry, immigrants represent around 39%. But if you want, talking about agriculture, immigrants represent around 64% of the total workforce of that sector. And 40%, around 40% are undocumented immigrants. So it's a huge amount. So you can see the importance of this in one of the key sectors of the US economy. And you have also construction and extraction, around 30%, healthcare support, 23%, and all healthcare workers, 18%, and STEM workers, around 23%. So also, in this case, they are, as I said before, they complement with native-born workers, and they are helping innovation in the US. Around 36% of the innovation are contributed by this group. Now, I'm going to give some examples about the shortages that we have. But we don't, some associations have estimated, for example, by 2036, around 86,000 physicians we are going to need. We don't have those people here in the, well, we are not going to have by
very compelling example, in order to hire, because we don't have policies that are better in terms of being more visas, but also, again, thinking smarter ways in which we're going to design those policies. So let's think about it with two specific ones. So the first one is the H-2B visa program. And I apologize, this is very in the weeds. So bear with, maybe go have some more certainty. Okay. So the H-2B program is one of our guest worker programs. And sometimes it's called less skilled. Now, these are jobs I couldn't do. They require lots of manual labor skills, certainly, but they're restricted to seasonal jobs, typically going to be in landscaping. And you can come for about a year. You can do this 3 times, then you have to step out, and then you can come back. There are only 66,000 of these visas available per year. So each year, 66,000 in a typical year can enter. Now, when labor markets get really tight, the Department of Labor does, with congressional authorization, get to increase that number at the last minute, and it becomes a big scramble for employers to use it. But 66,000 a year, that's it, right? So again, they can supplement a little bit. Now, how many workers do y'all think there are in Texas? Big state, really important. How many people are working here? What would you guess?
15 million.
10 million, very good. Okay, how many H-2B workers?
Couple
So
thousand.
of that 10 million, 14,768 this year, H-2B workers, a drop in the bucket. And it's this way for almost every single state. Now, how many unauthorized workers do you have in Texas and across most of the United States? A whole lot. Why? These workers would rather come legally. A lot of their employers would probably rather hire them legally as well, but there's just not enough visas available. And it's the case not just in Texas, y'all are in the middle of the pack, this is Florida, but it's the case across almost all of the country. Alaska appears to be a little bit better getting those workers somehow. All right, so what should we do? Well, first thing is that this is just seasonal jobs. They're almost all in landscaping. Construction companies that need to hire workers year round, they can't use it. Dairy farms that need to milk the cows year round can't use it. Why are we limiting this to temporary seasonal jobs? Why not open it up, have more visas, but again, tie them with a rule in advance to economic conditions, not a last minute change in the number of these. We should be prioritizing areas, parts of the country, industries, employers that are most in need of workers. I have an entire book about why we should auction off visas in this case as one way to determine who most needs or wants these workers by using the power of the almighty dollar. So that's something that we could consider. We should probably allow these workers to move employers in order to help keep labor markets fluid and moving. And most importantly, I think that if you come here and you work in this program over and over and over, why can't you become a permanent resident? Why aren't we giving an automatic pathway of permanent residence to these workers after they contribute for a certain number of years? We just don't do it. This program is not what's called dual intent. You can't say. So that's going to build less skilled, if you will. Again, they're still skilled, just a different set of skill. The high skilled program is called the H-1B program. So this is skilled specialty visas. Lots of them are computer programmers for India. This one, 65,000 a year, an additional 20,000 right now if you have a U.S. master's or PhD, with an exemption for research jobs, who are almost all professors. Okay, so Texas, again, 10 million workers. How many H-1Bs this last year? About 8,322. And relative to the size of the number of workers in Texas, Texas was third behind New Jersey and Virginia in getting these, in large part because of Tesla, Infosys, University of Texas, some very big employers here that are using the program. But it could be, again, a whole lot bigger. So in particular, we want to be smarter, not just more, but smarter. So why not target the areas that are going to increase economic growth the most? These are going to be the STEM degrees. Why aren't we prioritizing those sectors? Or again, auctioning off these, the right to hire through this program. And again, I think one of the most important things is to provide an automatic pathway to permanent residence. Most of these people want to stay. Most of their employers want them to stay as well. Not all, but in most cases. If you are an Indian and your employer wants to sponsor you through this program, most of those Indians are going to wait over 100 years before a visa will become available for them to stay permanently. They're not going to live that long, right? So we need to change this program. It's obvious. There are so many other groups, right? DACA, very important to Texas and California and across the country. Temporary protected status, a group of people who from countries that it's not safe to return home to. This group is almost as big in size right now as DACA recipients. But we need reforms for these people who are here, in many cases, years, decades, contributing to our economy. The children of those Indian H-1B holders, they're aging out on being on their parents' visa, and they don't have a way to stay. In many cases, they've been here since they were tiny kids. We paid for their public school education K through 12, maybe even help contribute to their college degree, and they're aging out. We need a way for them to stay instead of them getting on the same merry-go-round as their parents. And of course, then we have long-term unauthorized workers. The average unauthorized immigrant has been in the country for over 20 years. And we haven't done much of anything in terms of providing a pathway for people who've been here for a long time working to stay. Okay, there are some recent wins. I've been very negative. We have this program that the president did of Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans about admitting them in advance with what's called humanitarian parole, so they don't show up at the border. Instead, they go through a legal process where they're screened, they fly in, and so on. We have the Uniting for Ukraine program where you can sponsor someone and their family to come from Ukraine. These are potentially wins, right? The administration's considering changing Schedule A, and this is very in the weeds. I'm happy to talk about it during Q&A. But the problem with almost all of this is that it's kicking the can down the road. Because many people who will get to stay for 18 months, 2 years, something like that. And then you either have to renew that permission or they have to leave or they join the unauthorized workforce. And so in many ways, the current administration has added to future problems, right? As I think we might all agree, as you might make clear, the economic impact is really positive. And there's a whole bunch of research I'm happy to talk about later. One thing that I think Americans don't realize enough is literally all of the growth in our labor force has been coming from immigrants. And it's not because Americans aren't getting jobs, because of immigrants, so that again, we're getting old and we're going to need those foreign-born healthcare workers. One thing though we need to talk about is distributive effects, right? Who's winning and who's losing. Overall, the pie gets bigger, but not everybody's slice of the pie does get bigger. And in particular, immigrant-intensive communities and the least skilled Americans are probably experiencing costs. And we need to figure out ways to help compensate those communities for those costs and also make sure that everybody has an equal chance, right? Last thing is just a picture from the taco place in Erie that I would love to go. The immigrants, they make America great and they cook perfect. With that, Q&A.
Well, I was gonna ask some questions about our friends, but I know I took a few more minutes than I should have. So why don't we just have you ask questions? We have a lot of data, we have a lot of vision on these things. The only thing I would add is the TN visa is such a wonderful visa because, but only for Canadians and Mexicans, but it's such a great visa because it is so completely different than almost all the other visas. It has no cap whatsoever, not 66,000, not 85,000, none of that. It can be renewed every 3 years indefinitely. It doesn't lead to an LPR, a long permanent residency, but it can be renewed on. All you need is a job offer to come into the United States and work. Canadians can get the stamp at the border, Mexicans have to go to a consulate, but it's very easy to get. The denial rate is very, very low, less than 5%, sometimes even 1 or 2%. And the nicest thing about that visa, the TN visa, is that it is almost perfectly economic performance indexed. Because if the economy is doing very well, job offers are going to flow, visas are going to be dished out. If the economy is not doing very well, there will not be any job offers. So no workers will come. It's really, we need visas that are really indexed, as Madeline just mentioned, indexed to the economic performance, not a last, put out the fire with an additional 20,000 visas, but rather allow the market, employers and workers to determine the number of visas they need and how to apply for them and make the application a lot easier without necessarily making it an unsafe or insecure visa, so to speak. But anyway, I just wanted to add that about the teen visas. I think it's wonderful. The limit, of course, is that it's 16 for the professions, and they've been stretched, you know, to fit a lot of jobs. But I think we need to update the list. It's a 30-year-old list. Some of those professions in the list don't even exist from 30 years ago.
But it's better than the Schedule A list, which is two nurses and physical therapists. So what Schedule A is it's this way to bypass this very expensive and lengthy procedure called PERM, where if you want to sponsor a worker for permanent residence, you have to go through and demonstrate that you can't find a qualified American. It's a very long process, right? And so there are two occupations in the U.S. for which you don't have to go through PERM right now. Why those two? It's been over 30 years since we changed that.
I've gone through the process of filing the residency for 2 employees in my center. It's been grueling, and it takes 3 years, 3.5 years. It's really difficult, and I have to stay on it. And it costs $10,000. The entire thing, and of course I have to hire a lawyer because I'm not an expert, and so I'm paying for 2 workers. I'm paying $20,000, and probably more if the process goes longer. So anyway, I don't want to steal the microphone. Please come on up and ask a question, or just raise your hand. Come on up and you know, just ask your question. Yeah, we'll probably need to turn it on. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rosa. I'm teaching political science. I'm teaching at political science department at SMU. My question is, economic argument is very convincing. Immigrants good for economic growth, very convincing argument. How to convince politicians is my question. And then in other words, why don't politicians listen to economic argument?
Yeah, I guess I'm a political scientist. Let me tell you, we addressed that very question.
What was the question?
If the argument is so compelling and the numbers are so clear, why don't politicians listen and actually act on it, right? Why don't they just actually change the visa system, the nature of the visas, the ease to get visas? Why don't they just change the visa system? Now, we're not talking about documented workers, we're talking about a visa system, different kinds of visas and the ease of getting them to get the workers and so on. That gap between all the evidence, because the evidence, as Ivan said, the evidence is mounting. We've done lots and lots of studies, lots of people have looked at visa systems and the economic gains and things like that. And I go to Washington, D.C. I'm actually going to Washington next week to meet with some Congress members again and their staffers, either or, sometimes together. And they know it. They know it. They know the numbers. We provide the papers. They know the evidence. Their staffers read the evidence. But if you look at the political environment, this is a very hot topic because it's called a third rail issue. If you look at immigration, and you probably know that because you're a political scientist, third rail issue. In other words, it touches not just on the economy, which is a very compelling argument, but it also touches on the diversity of our society, cultural changes, racial composition of the country, because now people are coming from Asia and Africa and Latin America, and the character of the nation begins to change. And I think people feel very anxious about that. There's a lot of cultural anxiety and social anxiety. And I think that politicians have zoomed in on that and they understand it. We see Donald Trump, for example, who's been very smart at identifying that fear, that anxiety, and then translating into a political power, into political capital. And people in Minnesota, people in North Dakota and Montana and other places like that didn't even think about immigration. It was never really a top issue in the polls. And now immigration has shot up to number one in places where people don't even know immigrants. There aren't very many immigrants. They really don't understand what immigration is about. And yet, because they hear all the time, because the politicians are talking about that all the time, and they're talking about security and invasion and this kind of rhetoric, then people begin to kind of feel unsafe, insecure, invaded, and this anxiety translates into votes. This is one of the reasons why a month ago, President Biden gave the Republicans everything they asked. There was a bill. Let's start building the wall again. More money for the border, more money to stop migrants, more authority to deport migrants summarily without even processing them. I mean, gave them everything and got nothing for it. No DACA, nothing. And yet, as soon as former President Trump told the Republicans who negotiated the bill, you have to defeat that. Now, the very sponsor of the bill, Republican sponsors, voted against it. Why? Because Trump told them, what the hell am I gonna talk about in the fall? So we're in the political game and we can't get, they know it. They know the value of it. They just, it's a political game and it gets in the way of rational policy. This is a mismatch. The politics and the policy are not aligned. How do we align them? We have to vote. That's it.
Okay, well, I do have a question, but I have a question. I've been spending a lot of time with Hispanic students from Mexico, Puerto Rico, you name it, and in charter schools, right? And there are no Hispanic teachers. There are Hispanic administrators, but very few teachers. I'm a substitute. And so my plea is that they don't want to learn from certain people. I hear that constantly. They don't want to learn from us, meaning Black people, right? So are they learning? I don't know, because I've only been there once. But we need more brown people teaching their children, okay? But my question is this. When the Haitians came to the border, along with the Hispanics, Mexicans, Venezuelans, etc., Biden did not hesitate to put them on a plane and send them back to Haiti, where all hell has been breaking loose for decades, right? And now the president of Kenya has already stepped up, is going to do something about it, and now Biden has invited him here to the White House, right? Now it's become an international issue. Why did that happen? And why is the focus always on Canada, Mexico, and the US? That's the question.
When I have something about the Asian folk.
Well, first of all, I think we just need more people willing to be teachers, period, to stop demonizing them and making what is a really hard job even harder. Part of the way I feel that way because I'm in Florida. But I think the Biden administration, yes, what happened in Eagle Pass with the Haitians was horrifying. So that CHNV program that I mentioned, well, speaking very quickly, what is a way to allow a limited number of Haitians to come to the US, again, what's called advanced or humanitarian parole. Typically people who have family members already here, and it's a limited number, I think 7,500 per month. They get 2 years of parole in the United States to get a work permit right away, but it is a drop in the bucket. And it is hard to know in which country are we going to prioritize. We do the same number for Cubans, the same number for Nicaraguans, the same number for Venezuelans right now. Why those countries? Because they're strategically important, as well as things are bad, but things are bad in lots of countries, and these are hard decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to tell you something about the border. Because I hail from the El Paso Juarez area. And I have to tell you that, yeah, it's been very chaotic on the U.S. Mexico border, lots of migrants coming up. In January, I think, Randall, Blinken, and Mayorkas went down to Mexico. And somehow they convinced President López Obrador in Mexico to not allow migrants to get to the border. They're being detained en route within Mexico and then deported or retained in the shelters in Mexico. So the numbers have dramatically dropped. If you go back to El Paso, if you go to Piedras Negras, or Eagle Pass, or Tijuana, San Diego, or Brownsville, Matamoros, you will see that the numbers are way down, less than 50% of what they used to be, and being deported more quickly. But the Biden administration is committed to allowing about 1,000 a day into the United States. They get paroled into the U.S. They get given a notice to appear, an NTA, before an immigration judge. But the problem is that we're not funding we're getting into a completely different topic than the one we were discussing earlier, but the problem is that Congress is not funding the asylum system. We don't have the officers, the workers, doctors, the nurses, the social workers, and the interviewers, immigration interviewers, to get to these people, process them very quickly. There's only a limited capacity, and there's a huge demand. Lots of people arriving at the border, but only a few people to process them. So they get all stranded at the border on the other side of in Mexico. And then we only have 465 immigration judges in the country for 3 million cases. It's taken 3 years for one person with an NTA, a notice to appear before a judge. They can get a work permit, by the way, in 3 to 4 months, maybe. It's 6 months. In 6 months, they can, and so they can work in the meantime with with nothing but an NTA, and eventually their day in court will come. They'll come before an immigration judge. 95% of them get rejected, and then they get placed in deportation proceedings. But in the meantime, they already worked for 2.5 years. So it's a distortion of our market. It's a distortion of our system, our labor market. I mean, the kind of distortions that I mentioned, these are other distortions. Congress needs to fund the asylum system to process them quickly, let those in that can qualify, deport those that do not, and get more immigration judges so they can make the decisions faster. Those that can stay will stay. But 365,000 of these migrants that are coming into the United States a year, about a day, that have been coming in since January, they're going to add to those millions of jobs. I mean, they get to work immediately, almost 6 months. But it's not enough. Our labor market needs even more workers than that. And so they're not going to alleviate the shortage. They're just, they're going to kind of help. And then it depends on the jobs. Like Venezuelans want to do construction work. Mexicans, Hondurans, Guatemalans will do construction work. So it depends where they go. Some are more educated, some are less educated. But then you need to there's a whole another area of studies that has to do with the certifications, to practice nursing, to teach, you have to be, even to cut hair. You have to be, you go through a certain certification process. They're not certified. So they have to go to school. There's a lot of issues like that, and we're not dealing with it. We just sort of let it happen as it falls, and that's it. When I add something.
Thank you.
Yeah. You had a question?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so you're standing there, man.
My name is Aaron Koch, and I found highly interesting this event. Tony, you were one who finally mentioned the problem with the immigration department as such. I can't believe would ever come to this country, can't speak English, have no computer, and work with the immigration department to get my papers. I can give you a little example I personally had. I'm still an immigrant. I have still a green card after since 1965. Nevertheless, I need it every 10 years. I renew it. Took me over 2 years to get it renewed from the point I made the final meeting with the immigration office. I put requests up who to get hold of. First of all, you cannot make an appointment unless you have a computer. You cannot call them. You get a long machine on it. I don't know how it is going to be handled. After 1.5 years, I finally wrote them a letter. I got a letter back, sorry, we don't have any information about your case. I've got my money.
Yeah.
It went through the bank even.
No.
And then suddenly, after another 3 months, the immigration card was in the mail. I couldn't leave the country. It's impossible to reach anybody at the immigration offices.
Yeah.
Nobody personal to talk to if you're not fluent with the computer.
Yeah.
Sorry, good luck.
Yeah. We're not funding the immigration system at the levels that we should. If you know, I think maybe Madeline may know a little bit more about that. The U.S. CIS is self-funding.
And they've dramatically increased the fees. They've about doubled them in the next cycle.
To get more money.
Let's hope that they hire people. This sounds like the IRS, honestly. You also don't have to. Yes.
A lot of folks don't become citizens, they may qualify because it costs $1,000 now, or maybe 1,200. It's gone from 400 to 800 to 1,200, keeps going up. So just apply for a visa. These visas, by the way, are very, very expensive. The nice thing about the TN visa is that it doesn't really cost. It's, I think it's $180 and $6 for the I-94. That's it.
In
It's very-
1965, I was within 3 months on the ship.
Yeah.
After the application, I drove to Stockholm, put my car on board, departed in Savannah, Georgia, drove to Dallas.
Yeah. I think you realize very quickly that when you look at the entire immigration change, the system, there's a lot of things wrong with it. And the problem is not that the system is wrong and it's got many different broken parts, but the fact that those broken parts spill out into society, the economy, the labor markets, our politics, our culture, and everything else. It's all broken. And we can't get it fixed. Congress won't do it.
So I have a very specific visa question on healthcare workers. So as most of you already mentioned that at the very top of our demographics right now in the US, we're top heavy, which means from an age perspective, people are aging, baby boomers are aging. I'm not sure if you know that we actually do have a crisis in the healthcare industry as far as caregivers who at the moment, there isn't a specific visa clause for caregivers. The UK has been getting caregivers from all over the world at the moment to mitigate that, but the US has none, and yet there is a crisis and nobody seems to be saying anything about it. So my question is, I understand there's the TN visa. I'm not sure if the caregivers are, qualify for a TN visa, and I would assume would probably get those mainly from Mexico because Canada has the same problem we have right now. So other than, without knowing whether the TN visa is one of those, is there a visa for caregivers? And I don't know of any. And my second question to that is, same thing with the nurses. It's, there's just not enough nurses. I know we're training a lot as we speak, and there are many qualified nurses. I work with a nurse and recruiting firm that recruits internationally, and we have so many nurses that have had their credentials evaluated, and they're at the same level as a US trained nurse. They've taken the NCLEX exam, which is the same exam that anyone graduating from a US school takes, and they've passed that. But in order to get the EB3 visa, it's just dragging. So another 3.5 years before they come. And the UK, on the other hand, is like, oh, yeah, can you just take an English exam and hop on a plane?
Yes.
So what can be done, okay, for nurses, if not the EB3, what's the other alternative that is a quicker way for nurses to get here? And just going back to the first question to refresh that is what visa category can caregivers who so desperately need as in the senior care community and the aging population? Thank you.
We used to have a program at one of these ages for nurses, and we got rid of it, and I don't know the history behind that, but we do, and that would have been temporary visas, it could make with dual intent and the ability to stay, but it is I think emblematic or symptomatic of all of the problems, that we have. We don't have for less skilled workers, like home health care aides, a way for them to come legally at all, or if they're here unauthorized to legalize. And then for skilled, if you will, workers like nurses, we have these long waits to get through the process. And then there are the country caps where maybe they're going to be on a temporary visa for the rest of their life if they're willing to stay. So we have to do something. I don't know, we lack the political will.
Just a brief follow-up on this. My ex-wife came in the United States with a nursing degree. I contacted the hospital at the university hospital, talked to the director. She got an he filled out the paper, she got an immigration visa in 30 days, 1961.
Oh, 61. Good luck in that
So,
2024.
so the whole conclusion of this is that every time they try to fix something, it gets worse. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse. It was a lot better when I came to the United States in 1959 than it is today in 2024.
Yeah.
That's progress for you, American style.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Please help me in thanking our speakers. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As you've heard, this is why this was a crucial issue, and feel free to continue the conversations. Thank you so much for joining.